welcome back to Isabel's Digest. My name is Isabel, and I'm very sure that you don't know why this is a very special day, but do not worry, I will tell you. Today marks exactly 1 year of consecutive videos in this channel, and for that, I am super happy, super grateful with you, and honestly, just incredibly happy. To celebrate our anniversary, I'm giving you a very special video, which is a buddy read with my good old friend Polina's pages. You can find her channel in the description, you can subscribe, you can follow her here and in Instagram, where she has the loveliest bookstagram account. Polina and me are going to be talking about The Color Purple by Alice Walker, published in 1982, and I hope you really like it. It is going to be a conversation with spoilers that we had on Zoom, but I hope that you give it a chance. You can play it as a podcast in the background while you, I don't know, wash your dishes and whatever. And just thank you for an amazing year.
Your question of the epistolary form. At the beginning, I felt it was kind of one-sided, and I really didn't know what was happening. I was taking notes of everything. You know how there's this time jumps. First she's 14, and then she's like 20 and stuff like that. I don't know. I felt kind of, when we start exchanging letters, it was more interesting because we had the whole narrative of Africa and the missionaries and everything.
Yeah.
So it felt very whole, more like a conversation. But at the same time, they didn't know they were having a conversation.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised because at first when Nettie's letters appeared, because we thought that she was like not there for so long, it was just a bit surprising. It kind of just happened out of the blue, I thought, but then it was kind of nice to like catch up on her life as well. Yeah, but at the beginning, because we haven't seen her for so long, I was more interested in Celie a little bit because she was starting to change her life and everything, and she was starting to realize that the way that Mr. treated her, it wasn't that great. So yeah, I was interested in Celie at first, but then I kind of grew more into the prose and everything. So
yeah, I mean, we are with her almost for the whole time. So Nettie's letters or chapters kind of become as this break in the narrative.
Yeah,
because she's like traveling and everything. It feels as if you brought your mind as if you were Sally. Like everything was so inside the house and the fields with her. And then when she starts reading these letters and starts learning about the rest of the world, you as a reader kind of also get out of this mindset, and you can look around and be like, oh yes, there is all of these other things happening.
Yeah, definitely. What I really enjoyed with the story was that there were just so many themes explored, like in general, like because they talked about the whole Africa thing and how in America, even though people were kind of coming in and people realized that in Africa there were a lot of like other Black people, they kind of felt really apart from them, if that makes sense. Like they didn't really identify with the fact that there were other people like them, because in America they were kind of the minority, at least in Celie's like place and city. So
yes, I thought that whole conversation was very interesting because a lot of other African American novels talk about going back to Africa or their roots, or really trying to connect with the heritage that most often than not was erased when they were sold into slavery. So they're kind of trying to reconnect with the little bits that they know. And I think that the novel makes this very interesting contrast and parallel that Africans are a lot like white people. They are very assured of their pureness, very assured of their place in the world. And African Americans, because of their whole history of slavery, are not. They are kind of insecure about where they belong, who are they people. And I felt like that contrast and those commentaries that Nettie will be like, oh, the whites and the Africans are not that different. They still treat us as second-class citizens, or they still are suspicious of us and they still criticize us and they don't accept us. That's like mind-blowing, because it makes you understand that they could look back into their sacred past and their heritage, but at the end of the day, the African American has this whole history that they can't erase, even if it's a history of slavery and of pain. And their people are those who also went through that.
Yeah, I thought that the novel, it's because it kind of drew on these themes, and as you've correctly pointed out, like it wasn't like some other African American novels that are kind of mainstream and everything was the reconnecting, and this whole was more like an exploration for the reader as well. I thought that what was interesting that it wasn't, since it wasn't as similar as the other novels, there was kind of this thing that there wasn't just like one white antagonist to the story, because I feel like sometimes there's like, because of slavery and this horrible legacy that people have, in such stories there's usually like the slave owner is the evil person and it's just one kind of person and the whole story revolves around them. But I thought that this was important because at the time it's not just one person responsible for the degradation of the Black community, it's like all the generations. So I thought that it was good that they didn't have like a clear black and white side with people being evil and people being good. It was like this whole kind of like life, and I think that was really special for this novel.
Yeah, I think we also see that with what was her name, Miss Eleanor,
Hmm.
that was basically raised by Sophia, and how at the
Yeah.
end she kind of like really wants her praise and really wants her love, and she wants her to love her child. And Sophia kind of like opens her eyes to be like, I never wanted to be with you. I was
Yeah.
forced to be your maid. I was forced to raise you. Of
Hmm.
course, I don't have a feeling for your child. That I feel like I was robbed of raising my own kids because I was raising you. And how for that, first Eleanor is kind of like, oh, I'm leaving, I'm never coming back. But then at the end, we kind
Yeah.
of see that she keeps coming back because she does love Sophia. And she understands that what her family did was wrong and kind of like wants to correct that by bringing food to Sophia's daughter and stuff.
I thought that it was a really nice touch. I did think it was a little bit unrealistic that she suddenly like repents for everything and starts kind of serving Sophia, if that makes sense. But I think it was really nice that she did that because they showed, like Alice Walker showed, that her family was against it, which made sense because they were treating Sophia like she was nothing and they were basically just forcing her into labor, otherwise she would be in prison. So yeah, it was definitely a nice touch that Sophia said that, like, I don't need to like your child. And I think it was pleasant that she said that because if she didn't, it would kind of be like she still cares about the feelings of that family, even though she was
Mhm.
forced to serve for them.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk a little bit more about the characters because I think
Mm.
that we have super strong female characters in this novel and very interesting male characters as well. At the beginning, I was trying to make a spot the good man, you know,
Ah,
because we had the
yeah.
horrible man all the time, and I was like, there must be one good man. So I wrote, for example, Samuel, that even though he kind of comes in this colonialist religion mindset to Africa, he really thinks that he's going to do something good and that's what he wants. But then we have this repenting man like Mr. and Harpo that at the end kind of embrace their feminine side or their more sensible side that
Yeah.
was very oppressed by their feelings of I need to be a man, I need to oppress my woman, I need to be the one in charge, and I can't show that I like cooking or like sewing or like this or that. So I thought that was very interesting because while the men were more open at the end to all of this more feminine feelings or professions or ways of being, the women were, well, a lot of them were already very strong since the beginning. But Sally was very empowered at the end. She had her own business. She faced her stepfather.
Yeah.
She like turns around everything. And people
Mhm.
accept her for she is because now she is secure. Now she is fully herself. And I really like that development of the characters, even though like we see them almost like what, 30 years in letters? And we are not with them. We're just housed in the perspective of Sally as how she write them down. So we might
Yeah.
like lose some of that development. So
Mhm.
it feels even more like, oh, this person has changed now. But
Yeah.
they show it.
Yeah. That's true. That's true.
They
I
don't say,
completely
oh,
agree.
Mr. is nice now. she's like very resentful of him, but she can agree that he's been improving, which I
That's
think was
true.
a nice touch.
Also, like what you said about how the roles are kind of reversed. So the men are getting in touch with their feminine side, and the women, I think it's like, the expression that women are like wearing the pants in the family. I think it was
Yeah.
kind of an allegory to that, the fact that Celie actually makes pants. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I love that too. And how, I mean, the book centers a lot about God. I love how, because it's kind of like my perspective, how Shug is God is everywhere and God wants
Mhm.
you to appreciate beautiful things. And for Sally to be living in horrible situations, going through horrible things, for her to at the end turn into the maker of beautiful things,
Mm.
kind of sediment her for me as a God figure in the novel. But for her God figure is her sister and vice versa. So I
Mm.
felt
I
like
actually,
that really
yeah.
communicated that as God is everywhere and God is in everyone.
Yeah, I got onto that too, but I actually thought that it wasn't her sister who was the godlike figure. I thought it was Shug, because you notice at the beginning when she gets handed this photograph of Shug, and it's like Shug with her like foot on the car or something like that. She kind of It's kind of like an icon for her, because she looks at the
Mhm.
strong independent woman who's like going out and doing what she wants. And of course people are negatively talking about Shug, like they're saying, oh, she probably has some woman's disease, that's why she's sick and everything like that. I feel like Shug is this extremely liberated woman, and so Celie worships her, and she looks at the photo and she always thinks about her even when Shug arrives. So I'm actually wondering if their relationship, if Celie isn't in love with Shug but with the idea of Shug, because that's kind of who she becomes at the end as well. She's more free and more conscious of her choices.
Yeah, I mean, Shaw could also be a God figure because how she comes in her life and then leaves.
Yeah.
And really, that moment when she leaves is when she reconnects with everyone else's, with Mr., with Harpo, with Sophia, and she grows her business more. So I feel like it kind of comes as a savior figure to empower her and that leads her on her path.
Mhm.
And I think in that picture, Shug is wearing pants, isn't she? Because she has this one
Um,
leg open.
yeah,
I
I,
might be
I
wrong.
think you might be right, but I definitely remember her having like the hat with the like pearls, I think it was, hanging down the side.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And we have all
it's
this in conversation about God being male and white,
yeah,
and
that's true.
how if he's male and white, of course, it's not listening to colored women as any other white male in the world. But if we kind of like reframe it to Shug, then we have this compassionate God that cares about Sally and is female and understands what's going on. Like we see how she stops being in love with Mr. when she figures out that, well, when Sally tells her that he hits her, it's kind of like this punishment from God, like, you don't have my love anymore because you're cruel.
Yeah, I also noticed that, because it's like this God coming in, how at first Celie's letters were always addressed, Dear God, but then when they have this whole conversation about how God maybe isn't listening to them, or like Shug pictures that he was a cloud, but then she went to church with a bunch of white people and they told her that, like, no, he looks like a white man. And then Celie, for a time, she stopped addressing God. She just wrote Amen at the end of her letters. But then at the end of the novel, she began writing God again. And actually, I think she began writing it not like a short while after she returned. And when she returned, obviously Mr. was repenting. So, and before he started doing that, she cursed him. And I think it was kind of a reference to how maybe she's unlocking her own like inner God and this belief of God.
Mhm.
So that's why her words had such an effect on him.
Yeah, I feel like it's not talk enough how there could be an alternative way of being spiritual in general. And it's always within a religion or within an image, within a dogma. But in this novel, they kind of explore as being spiritual, as being in contact with nature, in contact with beauty, in contact with your inner true self. And we see it also in other characters, like with Sophia. She's always herself. She doesn't let anyone manage her in a different way. And even though we see her go to jail for like 11 years or something and to go through horrible things, she's still very much herself. She's still not repenting for what she did.
Yes.
And she's super strong. I feel
Yeah.
like one of the very small details of humor that we have is when Harpo starts eating a lot because he's
Yeah.
insecure.
Yes, yes. I kind of thought it was really funny that, you know, at the end when Shug walks in and Celie has this frog on her mantelpiece that Mr. made for her because she called him a frog. Like, I thought that was pretty humorous as well. It was similar to how Harpo's is portrayed as eating all the time, and how Mr. at first, when he was called a frog, he was also so insecure about it. He couldn't realize that people had different sexualities, and so for him it was kind of like an insult. But at the end, when he gives it to Celie, I think he kind of shows that he understands who she is, and he doesn't blame her for not loving him because he's a man.
Yeah, and he accepts that does have other forms of love in his life. He's like, I still love by this person, by my son, by Sophia, by my grandkids. He's not alone, even though he did horrible things. And he's not that greedy anymore. He doesn't
Yes.
need everyone to love him. I think that's very cool. Oh yeah, the whole Olinka people from Africa. We see how they're displaced by the British for the rubber company. And at the end,
Hmm.
I mean, the missionaries just leave them there. It's kind of bittersweet for that because they are coming in. We see it from the missionary point of view. Like, oh, we wanted to do good and we couldn't, but it's just this horrible portrayal of imperialism that we don't get to see from the Africans' point of view. Again.
It was kind of really, I didn't really like the missionary parts because of this whole thing with how they were thinking that they were the saviors and everything, but
Yeah.
really they were just making things not worse necessarily, but they were trying to promote the Western way of life because the Alinka, they had this like ritual of like genital mutilation and the whole scarring on the face thing, and of course that's terrible, and like it's a practice that we think at least should be aborted because it's horrible for the women who undergo it, but it's part of their culture, and them kind of trying to say that they shouldn't do this at all, even though that's kind of their perspective. It's like they were forcing their laws onto it. And also I noticed that when Nettie, she arrives, she gets a poster of Livingstone to hang up, and then she doesn't because she says it looks out of place, and I'm like, yeah, it does look out of place.
I think it's interesting how there's also this multiple points of views about the scars in the face, because when they try to convince her not to do it, it's like no one in America or Europe does that, and it's like that's even more special because it means that I would always have my culture and my people that are being displaced everywhere. They're taking everything from us. They can't take these marks away from us. Like in that point of view, you totally see why this is so important for them. But then it also kind of like it almost makes her not to go with Adam to America because she's insecure of how they're gonna treat her over there or that he's gonna leave her. So we kind of see her being trapped in I don't want to leave my culture, but I know that my culture is not going to be accepted anywhere else. So it's very sad for Tashi.
Yes, I also felt really sad for her when she said that, like, if something happens between her and Adam, there she's not gonna have anyone. She's not gonna have a boyfriend or a husband. She's not gonna have her family, and she's not gonna have her culture. So yes, of course that played a part in why she did that. But I also felt really empathetic for her as a woman as well, because it's like, first of all, women didn't have many opportunities as many as men during the time, and still don't have all the opportunities that we would like. But uh for her, especially as someone who doesn't speak the language that great, because she was described as having like this pidgin English, I think it was called, like this mix of languages.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this whole like scars on her face, because for Adam later when he does the same thing, he kind of realizes that she's beautiful just the way that she is, and it's her culture. But for other people, if they see just this woman who doesn't speak their language, who has scars all over her face, they don't want anything to do with her. So I definitely felt really empathetic towards her difficulty in choosing what to do, whether to go with the love of her life or not.
Yeah, of course. And also Adam and Olivia. Nettie points out how naive they are because they have grown up in Africa. They don't remember how Americans are brutal to Black people and how they're not the majority like they are in Africa. And even then, the white man rules. So I think it would have been interesting to see them adapt a little bit more, but I think it is a good closure for both of them to come together at the end.
Yeah, definitely. I felt like all the characters were so interesting, and you're absolutely right. Their arcs were just fascinating to watch. But at the same time, I also felt like each individual secondary character, because there were so many of them, like Olivia and and Adam and all of those characters, they didn't get all of the development that I wanted. Because, like you said, it would have been interesting to see how they adapt. But at the ending, I felt like it just kind of propelled us towards the whole, like, oh, now everything is good again. And it didn't really focus on the aftermath of what's going to happen next. And, like, of course, I didn't expect A Little Life, where it's like 900 pages and each character is assigned roles and developed.
Of course.
But still, I would have liked a bit more kind of focus on everyone and their journeys.
Even though we don't get to see each character's development, we kind of get to see it through the themes and how they're treated differently by them. Especially how Mr. just tells Sally when she's about to go, like, you're poor, you're Black, you're trash, you're a woman, you're nothing of value. And she's like, I might be all of that, but I'm here. That's totally different from the beginning when she was like, how I can't fight because I'm very busy surviving or something like that. So we kind of see her fighting back and still managing to survive. And I think that all the characters embody that. All of them, even though they go through hardships and they commit mistakes, all of them survive, all of them fight, all of them keep going in their own personal ways and their own personal storylines, which I think is very beautiful because the majority of them succeed in a way. They find each other in this little family. They find each other actually by reuniting the sisters.
Yeah. Do you enjoy the found family trope? I like it when it's done well, and I thought that here it was done very well, because at first they're not, like, they don't want anything to do with each other, but then they, at the end, they all kind of change in a way that bonds them. I thought it was nice here.
For me, it was very difficult to understand at the beginning how Sally could be with Shug, even though then we see them being in love and everything. But at the beginning, to imagine that your husband that treats you horribly is bringing his mistress to your home and you have to care for her, even though if you don't like your husband or anything, I was like, the disrespect, the audacity that I have to take care of this woman that is treating me like trash and calls me ugly in my own house. Right? I was like, how is she not mentioning any feelings of hate, of resentment, of jealousy, anything like that? And then we see Sophia and Mary Agnes or Squeak hanging out together after their little fight afterwards. And Sophia being like, you go out and sing, I'll take care of your child. Going back with Harpo, everyone being back with Mr. What was his name? Gary?
Grady, I think it's Grady.
Grady being first with Chuck and then being with Mary Agnes, and then Mary Agnes leaving him. And I was like, how can you all swing from partner to partner and still be friends? For me, it was very difficult. But at the end, I kind of saw it like their bonds and their shared trauma kind of goes beyond that. Like their personal relationships with each other don't conflict where they're romantic or sexual partners. And that's how kind of I saw it. And then you kind of have Sally and Mr. being both abandoned by the woman they love. And they would bond over that. Like, I know how you feel because I've been dumped by her before.
Yeah, I definitely get what you mean. It was a bit surprising for me as well, how, because like Celie knew that they were sleeping with each other. Like, it's described that she's literally hearing them at some points. And I was like, yes, like I get that you worship Shug, and I get that your feelings towards her are bigger than your hate towards her for sleeping with your husband who you don't even care about. But still, later, I also feel like Celia at first, she was just this, she had this lack of emotion. She was kind of like a sponge and she just absorbed everything that was thrown at her. But then later, we can really see the change in her character, because when Shug leaves her for this 19-year-old child, he's essentially still a child, because she's like, I don't know how old she is. She's like 60, maybe like 80, somewhere there. He's
Yeah.
so much younger than her. Celie, she's like, don't even talk to me. And I was like, is she gonna forgive her again? But then she did. And I was a bit like, yikes. But like, I understood though.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of like psychoanalyzing the characters a little bit there, because I think that Shug, even though she's always like, I don't want to be a mama, I don't care about my kids, I left them, I wanted to pursue my dreams. She was kind of looking into this relationship which she could nurture someone, where she could be a mother figure to them. Like with Sally, she's like, how much money do you need? If you were my wife, I would work for you. I would take care of you. How she's very like a mother figure to her. And then with Grady, he's calling her mama all the time and using her money, and like she buys him things. She's kind of like this mother figure, and then with the 19-year-old, he's kind of like pushes her into seeking out his own kids, her own kids. And I think that that's what she needed, and that's why she went with this younger man, because Sally was already not in need of a mother anymore. She was already grown into her own womanhood, and that's why she went with this 19-year-old. And then she found her own son, and then she sent this guy to college, like, okay, I don't need you anymore, go grow. Yeah, I don't know. And then her kids were with Mr. as well. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like they were kids that she really, that were a product of someone she loved, but she just like tossed aside. I feel like if we had a point of view from her, we would have seen that kind of like regret or feelings of, I want to nurture someone, but I didn't want them to become an obstacle in my singing career.
Yeah, I think that's like you pointed out how she was a mother and then she sent him. I think it was kind of her way of repenting for the fact that she just left her children to a guy that she knew was abusing her like metaphorical child Steely. So it was kind of the whole, I think motherhood in this book was portrayed very interestingly, because none of the women, like none of them really wanted children. It was kind of just
Yeah.
for Celie, she kind of had to have them because of her horrible stepfather, and yeah. But for Shag, she didn't have to have them, but it's just that they didn't know this about protection and everything, so she didn't want it to impact her career, so she kind of left them. And it was the same thing for Squeak and Mary Agnes. And yeah, I think motherhood was done well in this book, but at the same time I felt really bad for the children, because they were kind of thrown around from place to place and they didn't really know who to call mother and who not. Like with Sophia's children, they called her Miss Sophia rather than mom, because they just didn't see her at all.
Yeah. And I think parenthood in general, the fathers are, I don't care about these kids, I'm gonna get a woman to care for them. And then we have all these women who take care of the children as a job but don't have feelings for them, and are kind
Yeah.
of like longing for their actual children or for what they wanted to do. Like we have Sally taking care of Mistress children, but she's always thinking about Olivia and Adam because they were taken from her. And then we have Sophia taking care of the white kids, thinking of her own children being left to her sister and to Mary Agnes. And then I think it's very interesting how we don't get to see any of the other children that they mention. For example, Mister's other kids, other than
Mhm.
Harpo, we just know that the women got pregnant and left, and his other son was a drunk and left with his money when he was trying to make amends. But like there's no mention of them. They don't matter because Sally is the one writing, and because she doesn't care about them, they're not included.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm not sure if Sally and Nettie
Mhm.
had other siblings, but
Yeah, yeah, it was because like I'm not sure if you want this video to be spoiler or not. If not,
I
just
mean,
cut it out.
we already talk a lot in spoilers, so I'll put a spoiler alert.
Yeah. But just like
Speak
at
freely.
the end when it's revealed that he's not actually their father, like the person who was Pop, it's mentioned that they have like so many other siblings, but what really kind of bothered me a bit was the lack of closure, because we get told that they have siblings. She knows she has siblings because she grew up and it was like Natty and some other like children who there were the boys and everything. And then she leaves to have her life, but then she comes back and everyone is just gone. Like it's her fake dad living with this 15-year-old. And it's like, where is everyone? And I was like, yikes.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that we have this found family trope, but we are also with that feeling of, well, you had actual siblings or half siblings or whatever, the people that you grew up with, and you don't care about finding them or anything. I don't know. I guess that it was very difficult for her
Yeah.
to think back of them as family.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely true. It's like she's finding a new family, but she's losing her biological family. And since we were talking about the kids as well and how they're kind of at a loss, she's losing her biological family like completely. Even her children, she loses them. She's only kind of acquiring just Shug and Mister and Harpo and Grady a little bit, but Grady's in Panama and she doesn't really like him. So it's
Yeah.
like,
And that whole segue of him kind of like doing weed and going
yeah,
to do that, I was like, it was this necessary. I don't know. I feel like the whole time of, I think it portrayed African Americans kind of bad and of them doing drugs. Not that doing drugs in general is bad or that people that do weed are bad or anything, but I felt like it wasn't very necessary to the story or to Grady as a character, because we don't get any read to see him beyond that. He's kind of like this childish man that follows Shug everywhere and uses her money and everything, but he's just like, oh, he left to Panama to, I don't know, I guess sell weed because he was selling all of it. And I thought that was gonna come in as a problem for Shug. I was like, oh, they saying that he's planting it behind her house, there's gonna be like a thing. But then it never came fully as a plot
yeah,
point.
yeah. I definitely agree that like wasn't really necessary to the plot, because if something happened, then okay. What I found extremely unrealistic wasn't even the fact that he was going weed behind her house was no consequences. Okay, I can kind of get that because well, they're black in a town that really couldn't care less about black people. So I guess there's no one who really has the time to come and inspect them, and no one to care that drugs are ruining somebody's life because obviously addiction and stuff. But what I found really unrealistic was when Mary Agnes, because Grady got her hooked on the drugs, she came back and she was like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm not doing that anymore. It was making me feel lightheaded. And I'm just like, how did you just abandon your drug addiction that you had for like so long?
Yeah. It kind of like it could have been a plot point of her trying to recover and coming back with these people to help her and everything. But it was just brushed off as, oh yeah, never mind.
Yeah. I feel like there were just a lot of such events that weren't like, they were a plot point, like a
Mhm.
subplot, but they were very brushed off. Like when the Shug has the disease and she's like, yeah, Celie cares for her, and yeah, it's important for their relationship because she's kind of showing her vulnerabilities, and like Shug says that she's calming the like her hair and it's portraying her feelings as well. But at the same time, I was kind of questioning it because Sealy is not exactly a doctor and neither is Mister. Like all they do is they just like feed her and like clothe her and help her keep up her appearances. But at the same time, if it's like a sexual disease, and I'm assuming that it is, like it's never stated, but I guess it is, like I find it unrealistic that she was cured so fast with no consequences because it looked like she was going to die, but then she just suddenly recovered and she lived a long and healthy life. And during the time, I feel like that's a bit too much to ask, and maybe it was just there as an idea, but then the author changed her mind, and so we just kind of left it.
Yeah, I mean, it was called the nasty women disease, but that's what the town were saying, and that's why her folks kind of kick her out. But then she kind of has sex with Mister and with Sally and with probably many other people, and none of them have any symptoms of disease. Like, or then, or it wasn't that, or it was kind of like brushed off as kind of like Grady's whole marijuana business.
Yeah. Yeah, I also going back to the whole Mary Agnes and the marijuana business. I liked how Grady. I'm not sure how Grady referred to her. I don't think he referred
Weak.
to her as her name. No, like Squeak was Harpo. He
Oh
referred to her
yeah.
as Squeak. But what about Grady? Like when they started dating, I think
Mm-hmm.
he didn't like call her anything specific, but it was still a difference because when Harpo called her Squeak, she just kind of took everything. Like
Yeah.
Sophia punched her two teeth out and she didn't say anything. She like I mean she said like please get her out, but then Sophia didn't leave and she just kind of went with it. But then later when Shug tells her you should tell him to call you Mary Agnes by your actual name, it's like reclaiming her name gives her power, of course, because it's like names have a lot of meaning. And so I think that the reason that their relationship fell out with Grady is because I've never like throughout the book, maybe like once, but he doesn't really refer to her as anything at all. She's kind
Mm-hmm.
of just like a way for him to fill the void that was left by Shug, but not explicitly someone like he loves her, but she's just not someone super special to him.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like the whole thing about names is very interesting because Shug is not her actual name. She kind of picks her own name and makes everyone calls her that. She embodies this persona, kind of like a character that she performs with. And then we have the only person that has a nickname is Mary Agnes. She's Squeak, and her daughter also, her name is Joletta, I think, or something. And they call her Susie Q. And it's also like they are the only ones that have nicknames. Sally's like, make him call you by your first name, make him call you Mary Agnes, because it matters. It matters because it's like this is your own name. That's the only thing you have. And she at the beginning kind of starts a lot like Sally, just doing everything that Harpo wants her to do. And then she kind of breaks free from not one but two men at the end with coming back and leaving Grady behind. And I also love that. Oh, I was just gonna say that Chuck
No,
calls
no, it's
calls Sally Sugar, and she like that's the
Mhm.
only nickname that she gives her. She calls her Sugar sometimes when they're in bed, and they live in Sugar Avery Lane, like that's where they live in Memphis. So it's kind of like she names the place after her, or it's like a wink to that house that they shared. And that's like the cutest thing.
Yeah, I thought so too. I wanted to go back to what you said about like Squeak's daughter, how they
Mhm.
call her something completely different because Squeak is like a nickname, but Susie Q is like a whole different name. Like it's just a completely separate thing. And I thought it was maybe it was the author kind of leaving us with this past that perhaps Squeak's daughter will also undergo this transformation where it's her childhood, even her mother calls her by a completely different name, but then she's gonna grow up and she's gonna develop into this young woman who's also independent. And I thought that was nice as well.
Well, I wanted to ask you, when is this story taking place? Because the book is from the 80s, but I couldn't find like only with the mention of moving the of imperialism and taking away African land. I guess it's in the 1900s because there are boats and there are cars and everything. So I'm like, okay. But now that you mention the the nickname of Susie Q is probably just because of the song, and the song is
Maybe.
from the 60s, the 70s.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I
I don't know
know,
if
I
maybe
agree with
we
you that
end
it
in the
starts with
80s.
in the 1900s. Yes, yes, that's what I think as well. Because, like, there's I'm a bit confused with the timeline because it looks like it starts with in the 1900s because, as you've mentioned, the inventions and everything, but then we get references to the war, and I kind of got the feeling that it was the First World War, which would make sense because, like, it's over a period of like 30 plus years, so there's no way that they could have avoided the First World War because it
Yeah.
started like a few years later. But then I don't understand how they could have avoided the Second World War. So while I get your feeling that it ends in the 80s, and I definitely agree with that, I don't understand how the Second World War was avoided at all, because that was much more, I feel it was much more serious for America, kind of, because they had the
Yeah.
whole nuclear weapons and everything, and no one commented on that.
Then maybe it's before that. Maybe because otherwise our characters will be 80 or more than 80 at the end.
Yeah,
And they do
but
mention that they're old, but
I think
Adam
they
and
did mention.
Olivia are not that old.
I think they did mention that they're like 80 though. Like at some point,
Really?
Celie said that she was like, "Oh, like I'm not getting any younger." And then when Chuck said that they have like a 30-year difference, and he's 19, so 49, and she comes back like a while later, so they're definitely more than 50. So there's no way that they could have avoided the war. So like I'm
Yeah.
confused as to how that happened.
Yeah, especially with the times of the children, of like
Mhm.
Olivia and Adam, because Adam is just getting married
Yeah.
and Olivia is unmarried and they're like young people. But if Sally had them when she was 14, 16, when she was started to be raped by her stepfather,
Mhm.
then they only have that difference of years. So there's no way that they're 20 and she's 30. Or like,
Yeah.
I don't know, how old are these people?
Yeah, I was confused about that. That could have definitely been done a bit better since like it took us this long to try to figure out the timeline and everything. But since we're
Yeah.
talking about age, I wanted to ask you, what do you think the age should be for people who are reading this book? Because I've noticed, like, I went into some forums and there were some people who said, like, oh, in school they gave us this book when we were 12, and I was like traumatized for my whole life. I was like, yeah, like that kind of makes sense because there were a lot of graphic descriptions and everything.
I mean, I saw that this book has been banned systematically
Mhm.
since they came out from schools, especially in more conservative states. And there were a lot of debates of why is it banned? Because they just kind of say graphic violence or graphic portrays of sex and stuff like that. I personally think that it's been banned because of the female relationship.
Yeah,
Because
me too.
it's not that it's taboo anymore, but I doubt that that's what people want their kids to know in school as a part of the canon for American literature, at least, which it sucks. But I think that maybe when
Yeah.
you're 14, 15, the same as Sally is at the beginning of the book, you could really get in touch with the character, being like, someone around my age is going through this, that sucks. And that could like be more, make you more empathical, especially if you're not African American or if you don't live in poverty or whatever your privileges are, that maybe a book can like let you understand how other people live or how other people go through harder stuff than you when you are younger. So maybe I will put it like for 15-year-olds. But also it was very hard for me to read it and I'm 23. So
Yeah, I get your point. Completely so. Yeah. But I think that even though you're right that it's definitely more, it's easier to emphasize because I'm 15 and gonna be turning 16, so
oh my
I was
god,
kind
you're a
of
baby.
yeah, compared to you.
I thought you were
You're
18 or something.
no, people like usually say that, but I talk a lot to Bookstagram people, so it's like it's easier for me to. I have a lot of friends who are like 20 now, so yeah, compared to you, I feel like a baby, but at the same time, it's so nice to talk to you because I feel like we have similar interests and stuff.
Yeah, of course. And you're like so eloquent. I think it's because of that.
Yeah, but I also like there are people in my school in the younger years who I feel are so desensitized to violence and graphic descriptions, and I feel like that's also because of social media. Like yes, there are some parents who put like 25 limits on people's phones, and there's like video games where people shoot each other. Sometimes I
Mhm.
look at some of the things that younger boys play and I'm like, oh my god, like I could never play that. I don't like the blood flying everywhere. Like it's making me uncomfortable. So I don't know, for some people I feel like they could emphasize with the book, and then if they do it at a younger age, they have their whole life to develop this kind of new discovery that people have it worse than they do, and it could help raise a whole generation of people who want change for underprivileged people like Celie, who has to face this horrible thing. And actually, if you look at the world, there's so many people who live on $1 a day. So I think it's important to start to flourish this younger. But I think it just depends on the person. So while I understand why it was banned, I think you're right that it's more the fact that there's female relationships. Yeah, and actually, in Russia, no one knows this book. Like
Okay.
nobody, because it's not talked about at all. First of all, and second of all, we have a conservative government, and it's like if you talk about LGBTQ, sometimes it's considered propaganda, and there's a law against propaganda, and you could get arrested and stuff. So it's a fine limit of walking, and there are books that are recommended all the time, and then there are books that people are just like, I'd rather avoid this for legal reasons.
Yeah, of course. And something I noticed is that in a lot of reviews for The Color Purple, this bisexual and lesbian relationship is not mentioned at all, which is valid because you have so many themes. You have slavery and post-colonialism, and you have religion as a whole theme. Of course, those people might focus more on that because that's like what's more salient at the book. But
Mhm.
maybe like what is important to know is that if you read it in school, you are not on your own. You're going to have this conversation, hopefully, with the professor is going to guide people and it's going to explain, okay, like, yeah, this is a graphic depiction of violence. It is not good, but it's important to see it. Or this is a depiction of sexuality that you might have not encountered before, but it happens. And like, I feel like, especially bisexuality and lesbians in general have been erased of history, and especially
Yeah.
in POC groups.
Mhm.
So we have a lot of representation of them with white people, but we don't have that much with people of color. And I think that erasing that from the conversation or censoring those parts of the book or the book altogether is not helping anyone that relates to this or wants to learn more about their own community and different sexualities.
Yeah, I think you're completely correct about this erasing and the fact that it's not really talked about. Like I've noticed in a lot of media right now, what they do is because Netflix is considered like it's considered leftist because it shows media that's more liberal. Like it shows a lot of gay relationships. But I've noticed that in a lot of the shops, in a lot of the shows, sorry, there are like gay relationships and there are straight relationships and sometimes there are bisexual relationships, but there's no lesbian relationships at all, and it's just portrayed as it's more like if a woman likes a woman, she's bisexual, she's not lesbian. And I I'm just confused about that because at the same time they're claiming to be so much more liberal and showing every aspect of the LGBTQ community, but then people in reviews literally don't mention it at all, and I think it's a critical point to the plot. So if they don't mention it, I kind of get the feeling that they just don't want to mention it a little bit because they're kind of new to this whole thing that wow, like women can have relationships with women. So
Yeah, I think that even in within the LGBTQ community, there is this ingrained idea that it's centered around males, even if they are not heterosexual men. So we focus a lot on them. The idea that someone could entirely not be attracted to them is gonna blur in the background. And something that I really liked that in The Color Purple by Alice Walker is that she doesn't
mhm.
sexualize the relationship with Shug and Sally. It's beautiful, but the men around her, like Mr., is not seeing it as a fantasy, is not aroused by the idea of these two women being together, which I've seen in other types of media, that if there is a lesbian relationship or just women with women, if they are bisexual, is in favor of the male view, in favor of sexualizing them, and for men to imagine them together and insert himself in that narrative of, oh, two women together, that's so, like, I don't know, sexy and alluring to me. It's like, this has nothing to do with you. And I think that's something that is very well done in this book, even though Mr. has sexually been with both of them.
Yes, like you've said, people sexualize, but with women and women relationships, like sometimes, because sometimes it's not just like lesbian relationships, it's woman ex woman, and there's like other women, and it's complicated. But always in media, when there is a man who used to be in a relationship with someone, when he finds out, because I mean, you can't just like break up with someone and then go date a woman, and he can't just like not know. I think it's kind of obvious if you walk around Harrow's campus and you're completely comfortable. There's a tendency that men are like, wow, like women and women, and they're fine. Like if two girls sleep together, or if two girls take a shower together, they're just continuously sexualized, like, oh, look at what they're doing. And I think it's because men, like you said, project themselves. But when it's two men, sometimes I feel like it's women actually overly sexualizing them.
And I mean, there was kind of that conversation towards the end between Mr. and Sally, because Mr. is kind of mentioning that Shug is a lot like a man.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's like, well, I don't know any men who are like her. She's not like a man. She's just like very much like a woman, just a very strong one. So it's like she kind of stops him in a way of, don't try to make her masculine. Don't try to project on her, because you're not even like that. Yeah, definitely. I think that there is a big problem in media with sexualizing uh, couples in general. Even
Yeah.
straight couples sometimes are just there as a filler for stories. But I think that it's not in this book, and it shouldn't be censored because of it. Like, sexuality is part of anyone's life.
Yeah, and I also really like that in the Alinka, like in Africa, in their village, there was mentions of like women being together in the cabin, and it wasn't like
Mhm.
explicitly stated that they were lesbians or anything like that, but it was there. And I think it made it more realistic, because like, come on, you have an entire village of people, and you're gonna tell me that there's not a single person whose sexual orientation isn't like the hetero norm, like.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's something that I've always wondered. Like, for years, you keep men with men and women with women growing up, and there's like a clear division. This is what you like, and this is what you like, and they cannot be mixed. But then you expect them to marry each other and to live together and to understand each other when they have nothing in common. Wouldn't that just make
Yeah.
same-sex relationships more easy to have? Because, like, of course, if I'm only with women, I only feel like I want to be with women because men don't have any of my interests, and I have even lived with them. It feels so interesting how, when they mention the several wives of the chief, they're not jealous of each other, and they're kind of like this group of female friendship and maybe something more, because they are together, they're raising their kids together. They're kind of like they're wives to each other because they're together all the time, more than being with the chief. He's kind
Yeah.
of like there.
Yeah. Also, like speaking of what you said, with how it's kind of, maybe it's actually developing more same-sex relationships than people think. There's when Celie talks about why she doesn't necessarily like men, she says that she doesn't feel any pleasure in in what she says is down there, like as in paraphrasing what she says. So I think it's because she was raised in a house where from a very young age her stepfather really sexualized her, but at the same time she wasn't attracted to him at all. Like she was so close with Nettie, And then later when Shug came, when Mr. says to bathe her, Mr. is actually kind of shy to like take off her clothes and bathe her, even though they slept several times. And so is Celie. She's almost afraid to touch her, but at the same time, when she sees her body, she's like, wow, I actually like this instead of the male body. So there's that too.
And I mean, if you could take the point that for the trauma of being raped at a young age, that's gonna turn you away from male bodies because it like reminds you of all of this. But also, none of these men were focused in giving pleasure to her. So of course, she doesn't connect relationships with men as receiving any pleasure. And Shug really is careful with her and teaches her how to like touch herself and explore herself first. So she doesn't need of anyone to give her pleasure. And then when they develop the relationship, it's not only sexual, but is of real like companionship.
Yeah, I feel like the only straight people that actually got pleasure was Sophia and Harpo at first. Because
Yeah.
Sophia mentions how, she was just walking and then she sees Harpo and they're in the field and she's like, oh my gosh, like I want this man so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at the end, she doesn't feel anything towards him at all. And I think it was nice that they showed that too, that even though there are straight couples who kind of take pleasure, sometimes they stop loving each other, even though it seems like they love each other so much. And also going back to what you said about how Shug kind of educated Celie about her body and showed her the mirror and she was like, take a look at it. Even though it's never explicitly said that it's taboo, she felt like it was taboo to look at her own body because she's never viewed it as a source of pleasure.
And the whole, then when they talk about God, how she's like, and God is not gonna think that is nasty, or like God is not gonna think this is bad. And she's like, why would he, if he made you and you're beautiful and he likes the admiration of beautiful things? And that's like so difficult for a lot of people that feel a lot of shame with exploring herself with themselves, or when they have like other than heteronormative relationship and they feel ashamed because society tells them that this is not correct, that they're going to go to hell, that they're just deviants. And this is like, no, why would God be ashamed of you if he made you? And like, if you are a believer of God, why would you be against what God made? So I thought that was very good because, I mean, I don't personally believe in God, but I feel like a lot of people are conflicted because they do, but they feel ashamed of who they are. And a
Yeah.
lot of novels are either that, like you're either with God and you are normal, or you don't have a God and you do whatever you want and you're a deviant. But this is like proposing a third way, that maybe you are who you are because that's what you're meant to be.
Yeah, I thought that was actually like a beautiful idea that Alice Walker actually mentions, as you said, a third way. And I also felt that it was a little bit of a maybe a negative critique of organized religion, because
Yeah.
personally, like in Russia, when you're born, you get christened. Like no one asks, they just do it and they give you a cross. But not everyone who's christened is necessarily religious. Like me, for example, my family, we don't go to church or anything like that. We just kind of exist without like worshiping or anything. But I feel like a lot of people who have been christened and who do go to church on a regular basis, sometimes there's kind of this flourishing of judgment that it's not necessarily that God would think that you're wrong if you're not having the same religion as me. And we can see through history that religion has been a great source of conflict in the Crusades and everything like that. So I feel like it was a little bit of a perhaps necessary critique towards the fact that religion tells you a certain thing and then people sometimes feel ashamed of their own bodies because it's portrayed as taboo for women to touch themselves and etc. So I think it was good that they showed that God is everything and it's different to different people.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I grew up Catholic. I went to a Catholic school, and that's when I got my hatred for organized religion, of course. And I think that it's very transcendentalist, the book. I don't know if your version had it, but mine at the beginning, it had like an excerpt of Walker talking about her writing process. And it mentioned that she had to get a cabin in the woods because she felt
Oh.
like she needed to be in nature to write
Mhm.
this book. And you can totally see it, even if there are not big descriptions of nature or anything, you see kind of like this connection with nature or whatever that made it without naming it a god or without giving a set of rules like in a church or establishment. So I feel like it really makes the whole book come together. Even if you ignore the plot and you just get the feeling of it, you make it, it's very whole, like it sits on its own bubble.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you mean. And I think it's just really unique because even though it's never like saying that, oh, so the leaves on the tree, they were
Mhm.
green and they fluttered in the wind. As you said, you have this feeling. And I think in other books, typically, because nature is obviously all around us. So there are a lot of books that have the theme of nature and us being more connected to it and reliant on it. Other books usually explicitly say that, oh, it was in the field that she truly felt at home or something like
Mhm.
that. But here you get this feeling even though nothing is mentioned other than the field which she works and her husband basically does nothing to help her, but you
Yeah.
still get this feeling of her belonging. And then at the end, when it's written like to the stars and to the trees, and then God is like last, so she kind of puts him in a secondary role to the nature that he himself created.
When we think about the missionaries, how
Mhm.
they feel like they're gonna like agents of change, but they are not creating anything, they're just replicating European Christian values, and maybe that's why they fail. We don't know it. But also we have the opposite when we have Nettie, when we have Sally making the pants, or we have Chuck singing, making art, and how those enterprises don't fail. Maybe because they are like makers of something beautiful, something unique, instead of just replicating and not oppressing people, because I wouldn't say the missionaries are oppressive, but they are invading their space, and like the Africans know that they're not gonna last. They know that sooner or later they're gonna leave, so like they are
Yeah.
never fully included, they're not part of them.
Yeah, and also I feel like that was particularly accented on when I forgot the name, when Samuel's wife, I think it was Corinne, right?
Corinne.
Yeah, Samuel's wife Corinne, because she got the disease and she wasn't really used to the climate and everything. And even though they were there, like he said, they weren't destroying or oppressing, they were creating a school and they were trying to help those less fortunate. And yeah, obviously they were invading, but at the same time, like you have these themes of imperialism and colonialism, but at the same time, they weren't like taking slaves or anything like that, and they weren't forcing people to work for them. So it
Yeah.
was a bit different. But then when Karine fell to this disease, you could really see that that was the moment where they understood that even though they're trying to do good, they don't really belong in this environment. And so them trying to kind of cultivate it and make it around themselves and around the West, it's wrong and it has consequences for them.
Of course, and the whole like their whole dynamic, we haven't talked a lot about them, the three of
Mhm.
them and their little family. Um, how Samuel lets Nettie stay with them because he thinks that she is the mother, but they are really a unit, like a three people family. And like that's discussions that we
Mhm.
have even today. Like, what is a family? Is it always the nuclear family, or it can include
Yeah.
more people? And even though they don't know until almost the end that she is the kid's aunt, they kind of see her as an aunt already or a second mom.
Mhm.
And towards the end, we see Corinne being vulnerable of this because she thinks that she is like the biological mom, or that maybe she had sex with Samuel and like later he brought her and not telling her and everything. And like these are a couple that came together because they were both wanting to be missionaries. Like when you hear about their stories, you're like, how can you doubt of him? Of course you're feeling like this because you're kind of like meant to be. Like you were like super in love when you were young, you wanted to change the world, and now because you see that you can't change as you wanted it, now you are rethinking everything. the your life. Like I feel very bad for
Yeah,
her.
it's this sense of disillusionment, because
Yeah.
she thought that she knew everything, but then she sees that actually Nettie is the aunt of these children who she kind of began to think of as hers, and just maybe this combination of realizing that the world doesn't revolve around the West as much as she thought that it did. It's maybe what killed her more than the climate around her. It's just this realization that she's different and she doesn't necessarily belong.
Yeah, and as you pointed out before, motherhood is treated very different by her than by any other woman in the book. She is a woman that couldn't get pregnant and she wanted to, and they were praying to God to have children. So like that's the first kind of like stone in her way of what she thinks her life is going to be like.
Yeah.
But still she has love to take these two children and take care of them as her own without mistreating them or anything like that. So like I feel like she's very pure of heart. Oh, and then when we were talking about that nasty women disease, when I read it, the first thing I thought was Trump. I don't know if you are familiar with his whole campaign back in what 2016 or something. But when he was talking about Hillary Clinton, he called her a nasty woman.
Yes, I saw that too. Yes.
And that was everywhere. And then he kind of like started calling every female around him that was telling him that he was wrong a nasty woman. And when I read it, like it took me back to it, and I was like, damn. Like the implications of that. You're nasty, like you're dirty, you're trash, you're a second class, you're
Yeah.
stained.
It's honestly shocking how it's like I'm not particularly involved in American politics, but I definitely remember seeing this whole thing and watching how this played out. And then I came up on a post that was like all of the things that Trump said about women. And it feels like when reading this book, now that you mentioned it, I definitely recall that it was just so similar to what went on in the past. And it felt like
Yeah.
he was projecting these values onto our modern civilization. And it kind of shocked me that a lot of white women voted for him, even though he said these terrible things.
That's internalized misogyny for you. And we also see it in this book, like when Sally tells Harpo to beat Sophia
Mm,
because she is kind of jealous of how strong she is. How can she like
yeah.
stand up for herself and how she's not getting beaten? And but then we see how she really repents for that and knows that she did something bad to her, because that's how you see that violence really replicates itself and passes on to next generations. Like you have children growing up with violence and then they have their own kids and they hit them too, when you would
Yes.
think, oh, I just went through this horrible thing, I don't want anyone else to go through it. But it's almost as if you don't think about it, or you're like, well, I went through this, why wouldn't you? Like what makes you so special that you don't deserve it when I had to go through it? So that was also really included very early in the book. But then when she tells Mary Agnes to like tell Harpo, don't talk to me with a nickname, talk to me with my regular name, like we kind of see her already growing and leaving this misogyny behind.
Yes, that was also very critical to her transformation, because like it's obviously when I read this what she said, like go hit her, I was honestly very disappointed, because I felt like she was beginning to realize that, like, oh, it's really horrible what's being done to me. And I thought that she would say to Harpo, like, leave her alone, because his wife Sophia, she's special because she doesn't conform to the idea of being his wife. So when you call her his wife, it feels wrong because it feels like he's her husband, even though that's
Yeah.
what we usually say. So it was just also really amazing to come and see Sophia like beating Harpo up and them rolling around the whole house in chaos. I was like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what happens, man. And I love how when they talk about Sophia's sisters, they're always mentioned as the Amazonas. like
Mm.
evoking this idea of this women-led society of strong, independent warriors. And then we go with the Olinka people, and you would think that they're also like that. They would be like the Amazonians, that they wouldn't have this misogynistic views imposed by the white man. But then you have Tisha's fathers, I think, and he goes like, she's a woman. She can never be anything other than what her husband tells her to do, or like she is defined by her husband. She is nothing. And you're like, what? Like I was
Yeah.
expecting something more.
Yeah, and then you know when he died and suddenly the patriarch is dead and she feels like, wow, I can unleash my inner self. And I thought
Yeah.
that was also a nice kind of touch to it, that he died while she was still there and the missionaries were there so they could take her to her new life physically. It wasn't
Yeah.
like a metaphor for her being free. But at the same time, I feel like if right now, if some of the patriarchs metaphorically die out, I don't think that society would change all of a sudden like it happened there. But at the same time, there was a small scale change because he wasn't like the leader of the village or anything like that. He was just her father.
Like there's also this mention of how they always want to please the father, how little girls want to please their father, but they would never, because they're not what he wanted. He wanted sons,
Yeah.
or he
Yeah.
he doesn't value women, so he's never going to see them as valuable, even if
Mhm.
they're like the daughters. But they try extra hard and they try to always impress. And it's not only with Black women, but we also see it with Miss Eleanor, who's white and
Yeah.
who's always want her dad to approve of her. But he only cares about the son, so he doesn't even care if her son looks like him or not. So this is like, I like that inclusion because it shows that it's larger than, oh, this is how Black women are. It includes white, it includes probably many other groups of women that feel like their fathers or their husbands don't appreciate them. And then includes, it's a women problem, not a specific race problem.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of the whole it's a woman problem, not a race problem, I've read one of the interviews that said that Alice Walker, because it's referred to as a feminist novel everywhere on the cover, on the like description thing in Goodreads. It's everywhere that it's called a
Yeah.
feminist novel because it's going through the process of empowerment. Well, of course, that raises the question like what constitutes a feminist novel? But actually, Alice Walker, she said that she doesn't think it's a feminist novel. She said that she thinks it's a womanist novel. And she
Yeah.
kind of made this distinction that a womanist cares about race and class and other factors, while a feminist only cares about gender. But I feel like this modern definition of feminism, it's more intersectional and it's developing. So I feel like womanist is definitely going into this whole definition of what feminist is. So even though there were some problems that were only the things that Black women faced because they were the minority, but there were also some universal problems for all women. So I think that's what makes it a feminist novel, the fact that the women undergo these things that universally unites them.
Yeah. I mean, now that you mentioned that, it's very interesting because going back to, for example, Toni Morrison, that she writes also in the 70s, early 80s, and she was also very against her novels being called feminist novels because she felt like the problems that Black women go through is not only because they're women, it's also intersectional with gender, race, economic status, education, all of that coming together. And their way of seeing their men is very different. Because Sukla, that is also a Toni Morrison novel, focus also in two friends. And they do very questionable things to one another for you to call a feminist novel, but it, like their vision of men is like they have to protect them from the white man, like as if women's job is to protect their wounded Black men from the horrors that white men impose on them. It's like, so the white man abuses of the Black man, and then he comes home and abuses his Black woman, because it's this like
Yeah.
stairs of abuse. and of like looking of someone that you can take it out on. And but also, let's also think that early 80s, the 70s is the rise of the second wave feminist movement that is very different to the third wave that we currently live in. So maybe for us, we are a little bit more intersectional in our definition of feminism or who is including. But the second wave was also led by white women. So it's understandable that Black women felt like they didn't belong in this movement, or that they weren't seen with all of their angles and all of their experience as like people of color.
Yes, there was also the fact that for Toni Morrison and other writers of that time in the second wave, as you said, there was a clear division between white feminism and feminism. And even though now I feel like at least my definition of being a feminist is being an intersectional feminist and taking into account these like discrepancies between women of color and women that are not of color. And but at the same time, there's still this division sometimes with white feminism and non-white feminism. Like sometimes we say, oh yes, we are still like white women, they say like, yes, we are so oppressed and everything, but at the same time they hold so many more positions than women of color and Asian women and other races and ethnicities. So I think it's a bit harmful to say that maybe like feminism takes into account all women when there are feminists that don't think that. So I understand their positions that for them it was not a feminist novel because it focused on Black women, and the definition at the time didn't take this into account. So that's something that we as modern readers view it from a different lens.
Yeah, of course. And because we read it as in 2021, thinking back of wow, how revolutionary is this novel, and because we are taking into account all the other novels that came afterwards or around this time. But probably for Alice Walker, this novel wasn't written as I'm gonna write the next feminist novel.
Yes, of course.
So it's very interesting for her as writing in 1982 with figures as Toni Morrison, and seeing like, okay, there are these novels about white feminists, and then there's our experience that probably womanist wasn't even like a big term that people used back then. So it's like trying to explain your experience without anyone else on your side, or with very little people on your side that understand it.
Yes, there's definitely that. And also what you pointed out, that it wasn't like supposed to be the great American novel about universal Black women's experience. I think that none of the authors that we consider to be the greats have this idea of their work being something special. But then when readers read it, it's works like these that you realize that, wow, they really are special because for their time, they're unique to the experiences and they actually point it out and everything like that.
But I think that we also see this in the characters of this novel. Every female is different, and all of them kind of believe in a different way of living their womanhood. But they can all live together in harmony.
Yeah, and I think that's a particularly important distinction, especially with the fact that now there are a lot of media that are trying to show themselves as female empowering, and that's great, but all of their female characters, they want the same things. They want to be in a high-paying job, or they want to like not have children at all. And then there's a tendency, I think, to judge people who want more traditional values, who want a family. Yeah, who wants all of that. So I think it's nice that in this novel there were people who didn't want children at all, then people who cared only about children, people who didn't want their own children but wanted other people's children. It was just the whole range, and I think that's accurate because women are all different. We're not the same, like maths.
I don't know if you watched the new adaptation of Little Women.
Oh, not the new one, but the old one, yeah.
Well, I'm gonna spoil it a little bit. Do you know the book?
Yes, I read the book, so it's not a spoiler.
So we have the wedding, Meg's wedding, and Joe is like, you can still say no. You don't have to marry this man. We can live together on our own. And she's like, this is what I want, and you should respect this. I respect you having this dreams of being a writer, of living on your own, or being self-sufficient, but I dream about having a family. I want to have a husband. I want to do all of these things, and not because my dreams are different than yours are less valued. And I think that was a very important thing to include in our modern views of use, like you say, of feminism. And that's something that in second wave wasn't included, for example. It was like, if you want these traditional things, is because you're not deconstructed yet. Is because you're not intelligent or woke, or you haven't come out of these patriarchal impositions. But a lot of women can say, well, yes, I know that the patriarchy tells us that this is what we have to do, but this is what I personally want to do, even knowing all of this information. Like, there's nothing wrong with wanting children or wanting a family, just as if there's nothing wrong with wanting to be alone and independent, or wanting both, like a high paying job and a family and a side business of, I don't
Yeah.
know, knitting.
Yes, that's true. And also just this whole idea, it drives me crazy that we view being soft as not a strength, and we view being strong as something that goes out and you do something and then you just kind of take you whatever you like. But at the same time, I think it's much harder to resist, for example, if you have a family who has different values from you grew up in this household, and of course you have disagreements, everybody has disagreements, but especially if it's political and someone says something that you find extremely problematic, sometimes like I find myself in that situation with my friends, with my family, and I have to work really hard to kind of keep my mouth shut and not start a conflict, because like it's not necessary all the time, but social media and a lot of people tell you that it is necessary to start a conflict all the time. But I think for a lot of women, there's a strength actually in not speaking out and just waiting and forming their own opinion. And then they become like really hard set onto it, and they really fight for it, but they take the time that they need.
Yeah, I think we should normalize saying, you know what? I don't have enough information to have an opinion right now, or I don't want to start anything with you because I respect you as my friend or as my family member. And I once read that 70% of what people fight about with their friends, family, loved ones is something that you're never going to resolve. Like, if someone has a different view on religion, that's their personal view. As long as they're not attacking yours and they're not trying to impose them on you or anyone else, they're free to think and believe in whatever they want.
Well, there you have it. If you got this far, leave a comment down below saying 1 year with Isabel's Digest. There is going to be another buddy read similar to this one about a different book on Polina's channel very soon. I would let you know. Thank you all for watching. I will see you in next video. Keep reading, and when you're not, follow me on all my social media linked down below. Follow Polina too. And let's hope for another amazing year, okay? Bye!